Hey everyone, this is week 4, I think. Let me think. Yeah, week 4. So, so last week we ended up creating an HTML page using the header tags, so the H1, H3, paragraph tags, bold tag, italic tag, underline, and an ordered list, as well as links and images. And as you probably noticed, it didn't look that great. So what we're going to do this week is get into CSS and how we can take this pretty plain looking page and make it look a little better. So let's go ahead and get started. So you should have your link from last week. And the way we implement some CSS in here is to create a style tag. So that can be placed pretty much anywhere, but it's usually recommended that it's done inside of the head tag. So we're going to type style and close it. And inside of that, we're going to have our CSS code. So the syntax, and if you don't know what syntax is, it's sort of like, I guess you could say the grammar of a particular coding language or the way it's structured. The syntax for CSS is quite a bit different from HTML. HTML, we're dealing with different named tags and putting the content inside of them. And like I said last week, HTML is more like nouns or the skeletal structure. CSS is like adjectives. So the way we're going to describe things is by naming them and then listing out their various attributes and properties and then giving those properties values. So let's start by just doing the body tag. And the way you do that is you type the selector. So that's selecting what we're going to describe. Create these two curly brackets, and that's with, those are the two keys to the right of your paragraph tag. Now you don't want the square brackets. You need to hold Shift and press those keys. And those should give you the curly ones. So inside of that, you're going to list out the various attributes of this selector. So the first thing we should do is probably change the background color. So right now it's white. Let's change that to something else. So background dash color colon. So this is a specific term that CSS recognizes. I can't say just, I don't know, the background color. It's not going to understand that. Or background color, it won't understand that. And you can tell if it understands because it's going to highlight different things in color. So it understands color. It doesn't understand background, especially if it's capitalized. So we have to type it specifically, background dash color. And so we're going to say red. Let's make it red. Now this is going to look horrible, but that's how you do it. Now when you're choosing a color, there's actually there's 3 methods, but we're just going to go over 2. One is you can list out the actual name of the color like I did. So you can do orange or blue or yellow. So let's do yellow. But that's pretty limiting. If you want to get very specific with the color, you're going to type the number sign and then a hexadecimal color value. And we can actually either do that with 3 numbers or 6 numbers. And just to demonstrate or explain it, I'm going to use Photoshop. So Photoshop gives you different color models to use. They have grayscale, RGB, HSB. The very last one is web color sliders. So it actually works the same way as RGB. So we've got our red value, our green value, and our blue value. So if I crank the RNG all the way down to 0 and the blue all the way up, we're going to get a resulting blue color. So I'm going to go ahead and click the color picker. At the bottom we've got the number sign and the color code. And so we can actually copy and paste that here, and it's going to give us this blue color. Well, that's kind of hard on the eyes. So let's say I want kind of a light blue. I'm just going to pick it with the color picker just by clicking. And you notice it gives us this nice color value here. And just copy that and paste that. And we've got a much softer, more muted blue purplish color. But maybe I want more of a tan color. So maybe something like that. I'm going to copy that value, paste it, and voila. So now let's add a color for our text. So to change the color of the text, you just simply type color, colon, and then let's use that hexadecimal value code again. So I'm going to choose kind of a dark brown, copy that, paste it. Now there's other color pickers out there besides Photoshop, but Photoshop's my favorite. If you're inside of Dreamweaver, they have, like, let's say I'm choosing color, they'll actually bring up this swatch palette, and you can also have, you can click their color picker and hit OK, and it'll drop that number right in there for you. So there's various programs offer it different ways, but I tend to use either Photoshop or Dreamweaver to pick my colors. Let me just take some time to explain how the hexadecimal color system works. It's based on 3 sets of 2 digits or 3 sets of 1 digit. I'll start with 3 digits first. So we've got 2 that represent the value of the red. We've got 2 that represent the green value and 2 that represent the blue value. So you notice it's either going to have a letter or a number. So the way it goes is 0 is the pure black, and then it goes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and then it starts with A and goes B, C, D, E, F. And F is the very highest value. So if we have all of these set to F, so F, 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 we get a pure white. If we have them all set to 0, we get pure black. Now if I set that to FF, we're going to get a pure green. And the resulting color value is going to be 00, FF, 00. Now we can have some sort of intermediate. So 006600 will have a dark green. If we bring these all to 66, we get a gray value. So whenever all of these are the same, you can tell it's going to be a gray value. So CCCCCC is a light gray. 333333 is a dark gray. So hope that makes sense. So we picked our background color and we picked our text color. So already it's kind of got some style. It's not nearly as bland. But I don't really like this Times New Roman font, which is the default font. So I'm going to type font-family : Arial. Now everything is this Arial sans serif font, which I tend to like better. There's also Verdana, which is similar, but it's kind of different. There's Helvetica, but I don't think the thing with web fonts is there's sort of a list of default web fonts, and those are the fonts that come standard on all computers. Now, if I were to pick some other font like Broken Typewriter or some kind of cursive font, and I put that in my code, it's not actually going to show up for people on other computers because they don't have that font installed on their computer. Now there are methods that let you use non-traditional fonts on your website, and we're actually going to devote an entire lesson to that. But for now, let's just stick with the web fonts. There's also Comic Sans, which Let me see, maybe it has a space. I can't remember what the exact typing for it is, but there's a few standard fonts. But we're just going to stick with Arial. Okay. Next thing we should do is let's add a little bit of spacing around our page. So the way we do that is with padding. So I'm going to give a padding of 30 pixels. And now you'll notice we got some space opening up. Now the next thing I want to do is change the color of my links. Right now they're blue and underlined, and that's the default. But I don't want it to be blue or underlined, so what I need to do is style my A tag. So I created my A, curly brackets, and I want that color to be, I'm going to use Photoshop to pick that color for me. So maybe I want it to be kind of an orangish brown. Copy that, paste it, semicolon. Now it's not that hideous blue. And let's say I want it to be bold. So font-weight, bold. Now they're bold, and I want to get rid of the underlined. So text, decoration, none. Now I don't expect you to memorize all these. I mean, you will want to eventually for the really common ones, but for the ones that you haven't memorized, those are in the CSS cheat sheet. So we've got letter spacing, line height, text shadow, word spacing, text indent, all kinds of things. So I tend to just use a select few. But yeah. So our links are bold and not underlined, and that special color. Let's say we want the links to be a little smaller. So that's going to be font-size, 10 pixels. And now those are that size. But let's make that actually 14. So now it's a little bit bigger. Now, let's say I want to get rid of, I don't want quite so much spacing here. So the way we do that is the elements creating that space by default are the header tags and the paragraph tags. So I'm actually going to set the P, H1, and H3 to all have the same attributes. So the margin, it's like padding, but actually the CSS cheat sheet kind of explains it. We've got our margin here. That's the space beyond your element. Padding is the space within the element. And then you actually have your width and height. So I'm actually going to set the margin to 0 pixels and the padding to 0 pixels, or just plain 0. Now it's kind of gotten rid of that spacing. But maybe I want a little bit of spacing on the bottom of my paragraph. So I'm actually going to create a separate thing just for the paragraphs. I'm going to say margin. Now there's a couple ways to just specify the bottom. You can either type margin-bottom and say like 10 pixels. And that's going to put 10 pixels below my paragraph, but not below my heading tag. The other way is, I guess you could call it the trouble method, and that's where you don't actually specify a top, bottom, right, or left, but you actually list all 4 values out after the colon. So let's say I want the top to be 0 pixels, then the right to be 0 pixels, the bottom to be 10 pixels, and the left to be 0 pixels. Now the reason I call it the trouble method is it's TRBL, top, right, bottom, left. So that's kind of like treble. I like before then I couldn't really remember the order, but just think starts with top and then goes clockwise. So TRBL, top, right, bottom, left. So now we've got 10 pixels at our bottom. Now let's say we want 20 pixels at the top. So it's going to be T, or 20 for the T value. And now we've got 20 pixels above it, 10 pixels below it. And let's say I want it to be indented 10 pixels or maybe 30 pixels. Now it pushes it over 30 pixels to the right. So see how that works? It kind of, I mean, if I didn't use that method, I have to type margin top, colon, and then the value, margin right, then the value, margin bottom, 30 pixels, and margin left, 30 pixels. So see how much extra type that takes? I find it much easier just to do that. So I want 0 for the top, 0, and then 10 on the bottom, and 0. And actually, where did my bottom? TRBL. Oh, that's because it says margin dash top. Delete that. Now it's working. Okay, now let's work with divs a little bit. Now I mentioned divs really briefly in last week's lesson, but a div is basically a blank element that can be characterized to sort of contain different elements. So when we look at this website, I guarantee you when we look in the code, we're going to see div tags everywhere. So, and they're all going to have IDs. So see, we've got div ID equals header wrap. We've got div ID equals header, div ID equals navigation. We've got div class switcher wrap. So actually, if I inspect element, you can do this in Chrome or you can do that in Firefox with Firebug installed. But as I highlight these different divs, you're going to see the different sections. Now, when I click on it, over on the right, they give me the CSS value. So I've got div ID equals page. This little number sign represents ID equals. So you notice here we've got the background, and they actually have an image set for the background. They've got a border of 1 pixel solid gray. It's got a width of 720 or 752. Position and z-index we'll talk about later. But with divs, you just basically create a div, give it an ID, and then style the heck out of that ID. So in our case, I'm actually going to put a div around the whole thing with an ID of wrapper. So initially, you're not going to really see anything. That's because we haven't applied any characteristics to it. So let's go ahead, and you actually don't even have to write div. You can just type, sorry, I can't type. You can type number sign wrapper, and that's going to refer to this div with an ID of wrapper. So I want everything inside of there to be centered. So text align center. Now everything is centered that's inside of that div. Now let's say I take this top part and I move that down to my favorite site. Now everything else is left aligned. My favorite site is centered. So we can sort of see the effects of this div, like the wind. It's like you can't really see the div itself, but you can see what its styles are doing. So just so we can sort of visualize this wrapper div, let's just give it a border. So border, solid, 1 pixel, and 4 to give it a gray color. Now we can see exactly where that div is. So now let's say we want give it some padding. So maybe 20 pixels. And I showed you the trouble method here. You can actually just use one value, and that's going to apply it to all the sides. So now we've got 20 on the top, 20 on the bottom, 20 on the left and right, but we're not going to see it because the width is actually conforming to the full width of the page. Now if I want this to be a specific width and height, I just have to type width, say 200 pixels, and height, 200 pixels. And I'm going to get rid of text line centered. Now we've got this padding plus the height. So when I actually measure the size of this box, it's not going to be whatever we set it to, 200 by 200. It's going to be 242 by 242. Now that's because we're adding the width of, or the size of the padding and also the size of the border. So the border is 1 pixel, so we've got to add the left plus the right. That accounts for the 2, and then we've got 20 pixels of padding on this side and 20 pixels on the right. So that's 20 plus 20 plus 1 plus 1, and that ends up being 42 extra pixels, and that gets applied to the top too. So it's going to be the initial height and width plus 21 on each side. So we can also add margin using the trouble method. So I'm going to use 20 to the top, 0, 0, 0. And that's going to push it down from here 20 pixels. Now let's say I want this whole page to be centered. So kind of like this. See, I've got equal spacing on the right and left. But notice the text inside is actually left aligned in most cases. The way that we do that is to set the margin to auto. So let me go ahead and instead of having the wrapper div just around my favorite section, I'm going to put it back at the top so it wraps the whole thing. You'll notice now everything is 200 wide, and everything, and even though the height is set to 200, it kind of just spills over the edge. I'm going to get rid of the height. So now it now the height is just wrapped around the actual height of the elements. I'm going to get rid of the top margin. So now all we have is the padding of the body, but I want this whole thing right in the center. What we do is we set the right and the left to auto. So TR, so for right, auto, and auto. Now we've got it right in the middle, and all of our text is still left aligned. Let's give it a little more width. So make that 600, and voila. Now actually, let's say I want this to actually have a different color than the actual background. So I'm going to make my background color FFF, so pure white. Yet the background or the body stays. And also I can make my border, instead of solid, I can make it dotted. Notice it gets these dots around it now. So yeah, we've got a nicely styled page. I mean, it doesn't look great, but compare this to, I'm going to get rid of this style. That. Pretty big difference, huh? So what I want you guys to do for homework is go ahead and do your own unique styling for your page. And I recommend using all the different things that I used. So I used font size, text decoration, weight, color, background color, margin, padding, width, height, all that. I would like you to use all the things I used, plus if you want to go further and kind of experiment with CSS, go ahead and do that as well. If you want, you can set the specific pixel size for the header tags or for the bold. Kind of just do whatever you want. You can even like maybe break these sections down into their own divs with their own unique IDs. But go ahead and just email me your unique URL. So go ahead and hit Save Changes, and that should give you this address. Go ahead and copy that and email that to me. And email me if you have any questions. Thanks.